Hello and welcome back. Dear learners, in the previous lessons we have talked about the origin of the Russian language, the Russian alphabet, and we have also discussed that in the Russian alphabet we have 33 letters, out of which we have 21 consonants, 10 vowels and 2 signs. We have discussed in detail that how these consonants and vowels are pronounced individually as well as when they are clubbed together, they produce a distinguished sound. While doing that exercise, we have also seen that how we have been using them in the form of words. These words and expressions were widely used in our exercises. These exercises, which is aim to help you understand the Russian language in an efficient and better manner. If you remember that we have also discussed about the devoicing of consonants, adjectives and nouns. We have seen that how the endings of nouns and adjectives they qualify with each other. For example, while talking about the gender in Russian language, which you already know that we have masculine, feminine and the neuter gender. Accordingly, whenever there is a noun of masculine, feminine or the neuter gender, we also have the adjective endings changed accordingly. For example, if I have a noun Chilavek, which means a man, belongs to the masculine gender, it qualifies with an adjective Kharoshi. If we have an example of feminine gender like Jevushka, which belongs to the feminine gender, accordingly the ending of adjective Kharoshi changes into Kharoshaya. And for neuter gender, as we already know that if we have any noun of neuter gender like More, accordingly adjective Krasny will change into Krasnaya. Dear learners, we have also talked about the usage of Kto and Shto. Kto means who and Shto means what. We have also talked about the usage of cases in Russian language. As you already know that in Russian we have several cases like imenительный падеж, предложный падеж, винительный падеж, дательный падеж, родительный падеж and творительный падеж. They can be translated as the nominative case, the prepositional case, the accusative case, the dative case, the genitive case and the instrumental case, which are widely used in Russian language in our day-to-day communication. We have also discussed the usage of days of the week and months of the year. We have also seen that how in Russian counting takes place. The usage of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 and 10 and so on. We have also discussed the usage with God. We have learned the expressions Skolka vam liet, Minie, 40 liet. For example, here we use the countings accordingly. And now we know that whenever we have 1 to 4, we have different formula, as well as when the counting starts from 5 and so on, different formula applies. For example, God, which means year, it changes likewise 1 god, 2 goda, 3 goda, 4 goda and 5 liet. Dear learners, as these all aspects fall into a category of a case called Rajichelny Padyesh, we will be discussing about them in detail in its own dedicated session. Before that, as we have promised you in the previous lesson that we will be discussing more about the usage of Akom and Atyom, which belongs to the case called the prepositional case. As you already know that the usage of Gijie which means where, and kuda, which means where to, have already been discussed in detail in the previous lesson itself. We will be discussing more about the usage of gijiye and kuda, as well as in this particular lesson we will be discussing in detail about the usage of akom and achiom, which means about whom and about what. So, shall we go ahead? The usage of akom and achiom, as you already know, means about whom and about what. There is a certain category of verbs are used to describe them. For example, you have verbs like dumach, which means to think, gavrich means to speak, vaspimnach means to remember. These all kind of verbs are used to describe akom and achiom depending upon the context, which you already know that kto we talk about animate things and shto we talk about inanimate things. Accordingly, here akom also talks about the animate things, as well as achiom talks about only about inanimate things. Let us understand them with a few examples. Please pay attention to the slide now and pay attention to the sentences while I read them for you. Dear learners, if you pay attention to the usage of akom and achiom, these are the questions which are related to animate and inanimate objects. For example, akom on raskazivat, on raskazivat a druge. Here the question is akom on raskazivat, about whom he is talking about? He is talking about a friend. Here if you pay attention to the ending of the noun drug, it has been changed into druge, since drug belongs to the masculine gender, and accordingly all fundamental rules which apply to the question gijiye for masculine gender applies same. For example, drug changes into adruge. If it has been achiyets, it would have changed into abatse. Why? Because there is another fundamental rule applies whenever there is a vowel, a changes into ob. For example, if we have a question achiom on dumat ab universichet. Here the universichet starts with u, which is a vowel. That is why he thinks about ob universichet. So, accordingly you can also apply these fundamental rules when you use akom and achiom in your own speech. Please pay attention to the next example. Achiom anigavriyat, anigavriyat a novam ruskam filme. If you pay attention to the ending, here the adjective is novi, ruski, and the noun is film. Ani gavryat a novam ruskam filme. Here again we have a noun of masculine gender, and that is why it has been changed according to the rules applied when we use gijiye for masculine. And if you remember in the previous sessions also, we have talked about how the adjective endings for masculine gender changes. So, accordingly here again they have changed as per the fundamentals and rules applied for the masculine gender adjectives. Achiom ani gavryat, ani gavryat a ruskam filme, a novam ruskam filme. So, accordingly for all genders like the feminine as well as for neuter, we have the same rules as we have seen during the usage of gijiye. Here the distinguish how to do is that whenever a question is asked for a comb, we use animate, like in the first example we have seen. We can use verb рассказывать. О ком он рассказывает? Он рассказывает о друге. And accordingly, when we have used о чем, we have used они говорят о новом русском фильме. Accordingly, we will go to the next slide now. Here, with the help of dialogue, we will be discussing about the usage of the adjective endings and noun endings in Russian, especially when о ком and о чем are asked. Please pay attention to the dialogue while I read it for you. Антон, Наташа сегодня Ramesh спрашивал о тебе и о твоей сестре. Here there are two characters, Anton and Natasha. Anton is asking Natasha, сегодня Ramesh спрашивал о тебе и о твоей сестре. Dear learners, if you pay attention to the endings here, as we have just discussed about the endings of such nouns and adjectives of masculine gender, how they are changing, and accordingly they are changing as per the fundamental rules applied for the feminine gender. That is why we have used о чем он говорит о твоей сестре. Here твоя сестра has been changed о твоей сестре, о твоей маме, о библиотеке, о аудитории, etc. Same rules as we have learned while discussing the usage of где. Let us pay attention to the next dialogue. Наташа, а что он спрашивал? Антон, он спрашивал, где живет твоя сестра. Here, if we pay attention to the construction, we are discussing the usage of жить. А что он спрашивал? Он спрашивал, где живет твоя сестра. So, accordingly, the usage of где as well as о чем and о ком are used together. Наташа, что он спрашивал обо мне? Антон, он спрашивал, где ты работаешь. Accordingly, if we pay attention that the personal pronouns in Russian, when it is talked about the usage of personal pronouns in Russian, especially in the case of preposition, when о ком and о чем are asked. So, for я it is обо мне. А что он спрашивал обо мне, and what does he ask about me? It replies. So, accordingly, in your speech too you can use these expressions. Let us go to the next dialogue. Natasha, а ты не спросил о нем? Here, for about him, we have used о нем. If it has been for about her, it would have been о ней. So, accordingly, обо мне, о тебе, о нем, о ней, о вас, о нас, о них are used. We will be seeing more such dialogues in our next sessions, when we will talk about the usage of о ком, о чем along with где and что. Dear learners, this is the fundamental rules which we need to remember. Please pay attention to the slide and note it down. A, ab and abo are variations of the same prepositions o, ab is used when the following word starts with the vowel, as in the case of abatam. Here the next word is starting with a vowel a, that is why it has been changed into abatam. Abaminie, like we have used, it will only be used when it is starting with two initial consonants, like minie starting with two initial consonants. Before we go to the next sessions, let us understand the dialogue. Natasha, а ты не спросил о нем? Антон, я уже знаю, где он живет и работает. So, here the dialogue between Anton and Natasha are used to describe the usage of Akom and Achom, plus we have also talked about the usage of certain verbs which are widely used in prepositional case like rich, rabotach. Dear learners, in these kind of expressions where gdzie, akom, achom, shto, etc. are used, a group of verbs are widely used like we have just talked about, as well as in the beginning itself we have talked about the usage of such other verbs like dumach, gavrich, vasvaminach, etc. So, accordingly, depending upon the gender of the noun which you are going to use in your own dialogues and text, you can make them according to the rules which you have just learned. Let us go to the next section now, where we will be discussing them with the help of a few examples. Please pay attention to the slide. When we use questions like akom or achom, a noun requires the preposition o before it. While answering the question gije or akom or achom, the nouns and their qualifying adjectives undergo similar changes. Let us understand this with an example. Gije on rabotait na balshom zavoje. Achom on raskazivet a balshom zavoje. Here, if you pay attention to the usage of prepositions, achom on dumait or raskazivet a balshom zavoje. So, accordingly, if you pay attention to the ending of the adjective and noun, they are undergoing the similar changes like we have seen and talked about while using gije. Accordingly, the same similar changes are happening when we are using achom. Achom on raskazivet a balshom zavoje. Here, we have dropped the preposition na and used a because we are using the question achom. In the first example, we have used the question gije. That is the basic difference. Whenever a question is asked starting with gije, we will always use prepositions va and na depending upon the context. Whenever a question is starting with achom or akom, we will use a before that, and now you know that a is used and ob is used when it is starting with a consonant like atom, abatam. Abo is only used when it is starting with two initial consonants like minie, abaminie. So, dear learners, it is advised that you learn and remember all these aspects of the usage of Russian language, especially in the case of preposition case, while using them in your own expressions, in your own dialogues and in your texts. Let us go to the next section and understand the usage of gije and achom, akom in other genders. Please pay attention to the slide. Here we have given you a few examples like gije on rabotait na malinkai fabrikie. Achom on gavrit a malinkai fabrikie. Here again, if you pay attention to the usage of noun fabrica, which belongs to the feminine gender of course, and the adjective, you can use malinkaya fabrica, balshaya fabrica, staraya fabrica, novaya fabrica, tak dalye. It depends upon the usage of the learner. Here in this case we have used malinkaya fabrica. Gije on rabotait na malinkai fabrikie according to usage of gije. And in the next part we have seen that it has been used with the question asked achom. So, accordingly we have used a malinkai fabrikie. Please pay attention to the usage of the third example now. Gdzie она живет? Она живет в новом общежитии. О чем она пишет? Она пишет о новом общежитии. Here, if you pay attention again, that we have used verbs like писать in its conjugated form, and we have used о чем она пишет. And accordingly, in the first one we have used the verb жить in its conjugated form. Она живет в новом общежитии. Accordingly, if you pay attention to the endings of the noun общежитие and the adjective endings are changing accordingly. В новом общежитии, о новом общежитии. So, accordingly, now you are able to understand and distinguish between the endings of these three genders when used with где as well as when they are used with о чем. We will be discussing more about the gender of the nouns and adjectives when we talk about them with the usage of где or о чем or о ком. Let us go to the next section, so that we can understand how to distinguish between the endings of nouns and adjectives and how they qualify when used with о ком. Before that, let us make a list of a few verbs which are used widely with о чем and о ком. These are the verbs думать, рассказывать, спрашивать, говорить and воспоминать. Let us understand the meaning of these verbs. Думать means to think, рассказывать means to narrate, спрашивать means to ask, говорить means to speak, and воспоминать means to remember. Dear learners, these were the verbs which are oftenly used when we use о чем, о ком in our speech. As we already know the fundamentals of how to conjugate verbs in Russian. For example, we have seen the conjugations of читать, любить, etc. Accordingly, here the first verb думать can be conjugated like я думаю, ты думаешь, он она думает, мы думаем, вы думаете and они думают. It is also advised that rest of the verbs can be conjugated accordingly and used in your own expressions. Let us go to the next section now and talk about the usage of о ком. As we know that in Russian we have masculine, feminine and neuter genders, and accordingly we have the usage of о ком. It entirely depends upon the usage of the nouns and the adjectives qualify with it. Let me read a few examples for you. О ком рассказывает брат? Брат рассказывает о друге. О чем думает сестра? Сестра думает об институте. And accordingly, if you pay attention to the usage of о ком, here we have used examples of the animate, like in the first example, о ком рассказывает брат, about whom brother is talking about. Brother is talking about a friend, a друге. In the next question, we have asked о чем думает сестра, and here we have used сестра думает об институте. Accordingly, in other genders too, we have the distinguishing facts like о ком думает брат, брат думает о сестре. О чем рассказывает брат? Рассказывает means to narrate. About who or about what? So, accordingly, about what we are using о чем рассказывает ब्रात. Brat raskazivat a field mein, for example, we can use, and accordingly we can use akom dumet brat. If we want to use a noun like simya, which means family, we can change it according to the rules applied when we changed the feminine gender nouns while using gijia. Brat dumet a simie. So, in this case, so far we have seen that how we use akom and atyom. We have also seen that how these nouns and adjectives, depending upon the endings of the gender of the noun, like the masculine, changes according to the changes we have seen while we use gijia. The only difference we have seen that while using gijia we use prepositions, but while we use atyom or akom we strictly use a, ob and aba depending upon the context and the rules applied which are known to you already. Dear learners, since we have been talking about the usage of gijia, akom and atyom, we will be discussing more about the usage of these aspects in our next lesson. As we already know that in Russian personal pronouns are used to conjugate certain verbs which we have just learned, we will be discussing about a few such more verbs which are used in the prepositional case in the coming lesson. Here I would like to conclude. Thank you.